Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fascinating Facts, our 6-week journey exploring the myths and mysteries of Judaism. And today we are doing the finale of our journey. Lesson number 6, Beyond the Nose Job. Judaism's answers to life's biggest questions. We're going to be asking lots of questions about Judaism. We are going to be examining a whole range of topics. This whole course has kind of been a grab bag of topics, but today's lesson is really a grab bag of topics. And we're going to be basically asking a whole bunch of questions and answering them. And in the process, busting a lot of myths. There's going to be a lot of myths today that we're going to discuss that we are going to bust as we move along. All right. So as usual, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Today's lesson is generously sponsored by Elise Iser, who's here on the Zoom. Thank you, Elise. And by Gloria Klaparda, who will be here this evening in loving memory of her parents, Moshe and Fege Leibowitz. Big thank you to Gloria and to Elise for sponsoring today's lesson. And without further ado, let's dive into the lesson. As usual, we will begin with a video. Let me just make sure that it's sharing the video. To set the tone for today's lesson. This one in particular, we'll be talking about death. We will see a first-hand experience from someone sharing sharing about their experience in losing a loved one, and that's going to be one of the many topics that we will be discussing today. So please turn your attention to the video screens.
My father took his final breath at dusk. The long night and day that followed were a painful mixture of disbelief, numbness, and the crushing heaviness of loss. As his only daughter, I was very close to my father. One of my favorite things we did together was taking a walk in the woods every fall. In the days after his passing, amid all the confusing emotions, a memory surfaced in my mind. Many years before, as a preschool teacher, I had to teach my class about the burial of Sarah, the wife of Abraham. I was concerned about having to explain such a serious topic to 4-year-olds. But it was the Torah portion of the week, and I was obligated to present it. Children, do you remember a few weeks ago when we discussed that God created the very first person? Yes, they cried. What was he made of, I asked, doubting they would recall. Mud, they answered. That's right, his body was made out of earth. One child added, and he had a piece of God inside of him. Well, after a long life, when the piece of God in every person goes back where it came from, what part is left? The body, they said, as if this were child's play, rather than a deep philosophical discussion. And if the piece of God flies back where it came from, where should the body be put? I asked. In the earth, they answered, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As my father's casket was laid gently in the earth, and those who loved him best covered it with shovel after shovel of dry, rocky soil, I stood dry-eyed, reassured, calmly watching. Just then, like the 4-year-olds had patiently explained to me, it really was the most natural thing in the world.
In today's lesson, we are unpacking some of Judaism's answers, I should say, to life's biggest questions. We're going to be asking questions about life. We are going to be asking questions about death. We are going to be asking questions about our bodies and questions about our souls. And hopefully by the time today is done, you will have a different perspective of what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a soul inside a body, and what it means to be a Jew. All right, that's the goal.
Are we going to talk about Satan, Shmatan, and all this stuff?
And I want to start off by discussing something very, very interesting. It's really a myth that a lot of people tend to think about when it comes to Judaism. As long as human beings have existed, they have searched for meaning, for purpose, and for answers to big questions. Do I matter? Why am I here? Why do bad things happen to good people? Is death really the end of it all? And there's always been answers for these things, and often religion provides answers to a lot of these things. And there's this big myth that exists wherein people talk about the different religions of the world as one big mumbo jumbo, if you will. They're like, listen, obviously each religion is different. Each religion has its details, but don't they all have much more in common than they have that divides them? And while it's true that there are certain things that many of them have in common, like for example, all of them definitely attempt to give the answer to why we're here, but the answers differ. In other words, just because they're all answering the same question doesn't mean that they all are exactly the same. And probably one of the biggest phrases that really triggers me all the time is when people talk, for example, about the United States being founded on, what are the values the United States is founded on? Anybody? Judeo-Christian values, right? We lump them together over there as if it's like, oh yeah, Jewish, Christian, and I think therefore it's not that surprising that when people think about a lot of things from a religious perspective, especially when Americans, let's talk about it that way, when Americans think about a lot of things from a religious perspective, they tend to think of them from the Christian perspective, and they don't necessarily always have the Jewish perspective. All right, let's do a few examples today. Today I'd like to discuss three things. Really, the general topic is going to be, are all religions alike? But under that, I'd like to discuss two topics. One of them I know Simcha Bracha is looking forward to, the topic of Satan. And the second one is the topic of intimacy, sexual intimacy. And to just highlight the differences that you see in some of these topics between the way other religions treat them and the way Judaism treats them. All right, let's start with Satan. Let's ask a simple question. We're on page 186 in the book. Learning activity 1, circle the answer you find most accurate. Be prepared to defend your choice. All right, what do you believe the Jewish view of Satan is? Is it A? Let's see, raise of hands. If you don't have your video on, if you can please turn your video on so we can see. A, is Satan the arch enemy of God? Anybody? We have one. Sorry, I can't see everybody here. We have 2 votes for the arch enemy of God. Okay. B, a fallen angel who sinned and was punished. Anybody feel that that's a good description of Satan?
Yes.
Oh, yes, we have one for that. Okay, Elise. C, a devoted angel who was doing exactly what he is meant to do. Anybody for that one? Here we go, 1 vote for that. Or D, non-existent in the Jewish tradition. Anybody? John, Ron. Okay, you guys feel that Satan is non-existent in the Jewish religion. I think that very often Jews express a strong aversion to this topic because it's such a prominent topic in Christianity. We tend to think, you know what, this is Christian theology, it's not Jewish. And I'm not sure if that's why, Ron and Jonathan, if that's why you guys answered the way you did. But that's not true. Jews do believe in Satan. Of course, it's not going to be the same as it is in the Christian theology, but Jews do believe in Satan. And actually, the best way to describe Satan is that he defies God, right? But I would start better by saying that he's a loyal servant of God. What do I mean by that? Remember lesson 2, angels and demons. We spoke about all those things, right? We spoke about the angels and the evil eye. And how did we describe an angel? The way that we described an angel was very, very simply put by saying that an angel is a being. I think the term I used at the time was a robot. It's a being that is completely subservient to whatever God wants, as opposed to a human being, for example, who can actually choose to defy God's will. It's our biggest feature. It's not a glitch, by the way. It's a feature, not a bug, right? But as opposed to a human being who has that freedom of choice, an angel does not. So it's not really an angel or an entity that is the arch enemy of God. Even though what he wishes is for us to fail, still he's only doing so in order to. But first of all, he's only doing so because he's a loyal servant of God. He's following God's wishes, and at the same time, he himself wants us to overcome his own enticement to serve God. And that's a difficult pill to swallow. It's a difficult thing to wrap our brains around. So let me give you a parable. This is a parable that is brought down in the Zohar. The Zohar tells us that there was once a king who had an only son whom he loved to no end. One day, the king decided that it was time to test his child's moral fortitude, to see if he actually loves the king and he'll actually stick to being a mensch like the king had told him to do, and like the king had brought him up to do, etc., etc. And so he calls his son and he explains to him about the evil inherent in consorting with women of ill repute, and how anyone who does so is unworthy of even entering the king's palace, and he's completely not a mensch, he has no moral compass, etc., etc. And the king lovingly admonishes his son and tells him to keep far away from anyone like this if he wants to keep his father's wishes. Now, outside the king's palace, there was a notorious harlot, a prostitute. And the king summoned her and instructed her, "Go and do whatever you can to entice my son." And the harlot, who despite everything else that she was a patriotic subject of the king, she goes and tries to work her charm and run her numbers on the king's son. Now, she does everything she can, and she's following the king's son and embracing him and kissing him and otherwise enticing him in all ways to do the unimaginable or the unthinkable. Now, if and when the prince remains faithful, says the Zohar finishes the parable by saying, if and when the prince remains faithful to his father, to his promises to his father, and rejects all of the harlot's advances, the king is overjoyed, right? He'll bring the son into his inner chamber, and he'll love him and give him gifts and great honor, etc. But at the same time, what else will the king do? The king will reward the harlot, and while he rewards her, right? The Zohar finishes in a question form. The king will ask, "Who caused all this honor for my son?" It must have been the harlot. And if there would not have been this enticer, then the prince's strong moral fortitude and devotion to the king would not have come to the fore. Similarly, when Hashem puts us in this world, as I always say, if every time you put on tefillin, $1,000 got deposited into your bank account, there wouldn't be a single person in the world that wouldn't put on tefillin every single day, right? If every single time you gave tzedakah to someone else, you actually got 10 times that amount in your bank account literally that day, and as an exact cause and effect, nobody would refuse giving tzedakah. Instead, Hashem says, no, I'm going to make it difficult. I'm going to take all of these things that you're supposed to be doing, and I'm going to make them the difficult things to do. And I'm going to put an angel, I'm going to task an angel with enticing you and actually trying always to pull you in the wrong direction to see if you can withstand that. Why? Because it's no big deal for you to withstand it if that's the best thing in the world clearly to your eyes. When you have this opposite approach, when you have this opposing force, this other option to do, and it's a real option, and it's an enticing option, and it's a very big deal, what we call the Yetzer Hara, or the Satan within every single one of us, right? Then when a Jew overcomes the Satan, he actually gains tremendous respect and tremendous value in the eyes of God in that way. So what is the Jewish view of Satan? The Jewish view of Satan is that he is a loyal servant of God, and he himself does not want us to listen to him. And I often tell this to people that sometimes in the moment you're talking to somebody and you see that they're struggling with something, they themselves know that it's only their Yetzer Hara. It's always important to remind them, your evil inclination itself doesn't want you to do this. Even while it's enticing you and giving you all the reasons why you should do this, it doesn't want you to do this. The same driving force that drives a person to steal from another person doesn't want him to steal. They have to put up a good show. They have to put up a good challenge. But the forces of Satan themselves do not want you to listen to them, because obviously what they want is that you should overcome it and follow the will of Hashem. All right, let's move on to another one. How does Judaism view intimacy? Or put differently, is God in the bedroom? What is the Jewish view on sexual intimacy? In the Zohar's parable that we just described in the previous section, Satan is compared to a harlot, right? Who seeks to entice the prince into sexual indiscretion. So is sex a terrible thing from a Jewish perspective? Let's try learning activity number 2. Page 187. Let's see, raise of hands, okay? In your view, which of these best represents the Jewish attitude towards sexual intimacy? Is it A, reluctantly allowed in the context of marriage as a necessary concession to human frailties? Raise your hand if you think that's the one. I can't see everyone. Hold on, let me just widen the videos here. Anybody for A? No one. Okay. B, it is justified because it enables the noble goal of procreation. Anybody for B? We have Mark. Anyone else?
Let me say how to raise hand. Which one should I push to raise hand?
You can, if you turn on your video, then we'll actually be able to see your hand. Okay. C, it is the ultimate vehicle for God's expression. Anybody for C? We have Shari, we have Ron. B, for reasons of modesty, Jewish literature avoids the topic entirely. Anybody for that one? Raise your hand. Okay. So I see some people are very shy. They're not sure. They're like, I learned my lesson already from the first time. I was wrong. So I don't want to raise my hand. That's okay. The whole point is to be wrong and to change our perspective and to learn and to grow. Anyways, in many religions, sexuality is seen as an impediment to true communion with God, which is why in some faiths, clergy take a vow of celibacy. In other words, I only commune with God. I don't commune with any other being in this world, including another human being. Marriage is viewed as a concession to the flesh. Listen, this is what human beings want. What should we do? It's the only way to do that, right? And this notion is often floated under that rubric. You know, the Judeo-Christian values. Often people take this one, which is definitely a Christian view, and they supplement, they put it onto the Jewish view. But the truth is, nothing could be further from the truth. The Jewish view is not A, and not even B. It is, in fact, closest to C. Let's see what the Zohar has to say. Dave, if you could read for us, please, text 1A. We're on page 187.
It is written, Jacob 23:13, he is in you. He in you.
No, he is
Should
in
it not
one.
read- Sorry?
The phrase says he is in one.
Oh, I'm sorry. He is in one. Should it not read, he is one? The meaning of this verse is that God only abides and dwells in one, in the person who achieves a holy oneness nowhere else. When is a person called one? When a person is in the union of intimacy, when male and female join, they become one. They are one in body and one in soul. They are one person, and God dwells in the oneness.
So the Zohar is telling us, thank you, Dave, that in order for God to dwell among humanity, they have to be in a state of oneness. Why? Why is the oneness between man and woman a prerequisite for God's presence? So a lot of this has to do with the creation of man. Let's go back to the beginning. In the beginning, when God created a human being, how does he describe it? Ron, if you can read it for us, please, on page 188, text 1b.
And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them.
The Medrash tells us that the first man was, based on this verse, that the first man was an androgynous being. He consisted of both male and female. All sorts of discussion about how that worked, whether they were facing each other, facing away from each other, side by side. But it was one being, one body that had the male and the female components in it. Now, the next step that happened, as we know, that same day, was that Adam complained. He said he wanted a partner. So Hashem took Adam, this androgynous being, and he divided him in half. Often mistranslated, by the way, since this is a fascinating facts course. The word selah, which in modern Hebrew maybe means a rib, but in all the commentary is not described as a rib. God did not take a rib from Adam. He took a side, which makes much more sense if you understand Adam and Eve as being an androgynous being, and then he cut off a side. He surgically removed. He made him sleep, and then he cut off a side. And then they became a man and a woman. Now, ever since then, what has been, and the Torah describes this as it continues through Genesis, what has been the goal of every single human being? To find their other half. In other words, every single human being has another half, and when those two halves reunite, right, that's when the image of God, right, which was created in the beginning. When was Adam the image of God? Before he was divided into Adam and Eve, right? Then they were separated. So when does the full and complete image of God actually rest upon a human being? Only when they are a man and a woman united as one. And notice that we haven't even gotten into the soul business yet. It's true that each one of them has half a soul as well, a masculine soul and a feminine soul. But besides for the soul business, even just on a physical bodily level, only when those two bodies become together as one is Hashem's presence able to rest on the human being. Let's take a look at how one of the greatest Kabbalists of all time, the Holy Shalah, how he puts this. Elise, if you can read it for us, please. It's text 1C. Don't forget to unmute yourself first. We're on page 188. Go ahead.
Hey, know, my children, that of all that is holy, there is none as holy as the holiness of the marital union. If it is performed with holiness and sanctity, as our sages of blessed memory have instructed us, for then one is in the form and image of the one above.
This is fascinating. The Shalah essentially, he uses an exclusionary term. He says, there's none as holy. There is no other moment as holy as a moment of intimacy. Not because you're bringing a child into this world. I just want to point that out. He does not say that this is in order to fulfill a mitzvah. He doesn't say that this is in order to bring children to the world, in order to procreate. He doesn't say because you're married, so therefore you have to. No. Just because in that state of oneness, the form and image of the one above comes down and is represented within this union of the man and woman together. Now, I also want to explain now why Judaism has a tremendous amount of mitzvot, and in this light, it'll make a lot of sense. A tremendous amount of mitzvot, what's the word? Restricting or clarifying how that union is to be done. Okay, I have never done the research about how many mitzvot there are, but there are a number of mitzvot against incest. The Torah doesn't just say don't sleep with those that are immediately related to you. There's a separate prohibition for a person to sleep with his mother, with his sister, for a man to sleep with his mother, with his sister, for a woman to sleep with her father-in-law, with a whole list of prohibitions of who they're allowed to sleep. Even with the husband, right? The man and woman are only allowed to be together certain times of the month, as you know. Why all these restrictions, right? And as you start to get into the nuances of custom and detailed halachot that there are in the bedroom, you'll notice that Judaism treats this as a very, very sacred thing. The only other thing you see so many details about is a mitzvah. Things like tefillin, it has to be black, it has to be square, it has to be this, it has to be that. Very specific. Why? Because it is something that is actually a way of connecting with God. That's why it's treated with such importance that it has to be done the right way. Now, when we understand that this mitzvah, as the Shalah puts it, there is none as holy as it. That you want to commune with God, the best way to do it is actually by being in a holy matrimony, in a holy intimate moment together with one spouse. That's how you can become one with God. This is a fascinating concept. It also explains why you need so many rules about it. The more powerful something is, the more it will potentially be corrupted, right? If there is such a powerful spiritual energy going on while a man and a woman are together, then imagine what happens to the forces of negativity that are trying to take energy from these. I'm going a little advanced here, but I know that some of you have studied Tanya before, and klipa is the word that we use to refer to the negative energy in this world. Imagine how desperately they want to corrupt the spiritual energy that there is in this union and use it for something else. And so they come up with all sorts of other ways. Let's use this and turn this into a materialistic, pleasurable moment. Let's not make this about a holy communion with God. Now, in addition to all this, by the way, for a man to be with one's wife is simply put a mitzvah. Elise, you're still unmuted, so why don't you read for us text 2, page 189.
Okay. He must fully provide for his wife's food, clothing, and conjugal needs.
There is a biblical mandate for a man to provide for his wife, right? Food, clothing, and conjugal needs. These are the 3 most important things that a man must provide for his wife. Now, I want to point something out, by the way, okay? For most of history, the roles of men and women did not follow this. The first 2, yes, the man was always looked at as the provider. He has to provide for his wife, the food, the clothing. He's the breadwinner. He's the hunter-gatherer. He's all that sort of business, right? But the third one, if you look in most other cultures, for most of history, it was the opposite. It was the wife's obligation to the man, perhaps in return for him providing for her, whatever way that they formulated it. But Judaism has always looked at this as actually an obligation that the man has to the woman as well. It goes both ways. They have an obligation to each other. So it's before anything else, it is simply put a mitzvah. Okay, and I also want to add one more nuance detail. It's an optional section here. We are a little bit behind on time, but still I want to point it out because I think it'll be very, very enlightening to show what's going on in this moment and how we want to make sure that the union is done correctly. Text 3, and it'll also, by the way, put a big myth, which I don't think most of you here believe in, but this myth of the hole in the sheet. Anybody hear that one? right? This is going to put that to rest once and for all. Simcha Bracha. Do you have your book with you? I would love for you to read for us. We're on page 189, text 3. I don't know if you're here. Simcha Bracha, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. On page 189, text 3, if you can read for us, please.
Text 3. A husband may not treat his wife in the manner of the Persians, who have marital intercourse while clothed, saying, I can only perform my marital duties while I wear my clothes and my wife wears hers. Is grounds for divorce. Oy.
This is a fascinating concept. So you have this urban myth, this urban legend that exists, that Jews are only allowed to have sexual intimacy through a hole in a sheet. And I think there's some people that say it's because of the talit katan, which is like a piece of clothing that men wear under their shirt in order to have tzitzit on. So it's like basically a big piece of cloth with a large hole in the center. And apparently they would be out on the clotheslines, and the non-Jews saw this and they ran with it. But here's whether it comes from there or not, I don't know. Whether there's an anti-Semitic trope going on here or not, I don't know. Here's the most important point I want to point out. This is text 3. Is directly from the Talmud. It's actually codified in Shulchan Aruch and the Jewish Code of Law as well. It's prohibited for there to be any cloth, any sort of clothing. Apparently the Persians used to do this. I didn't know that. But for a man and a woman to engage in marital intimacy with any sort of clothing in between them. Now, it's such a brilliant concept because the more you think about it, the more it starts to fit in with everything we've just been saying. What is someone saying when they're saying, let's just be together while we're clothed? They're saying this isn't about both bodies coming together to be one. This isn't about intimacy. This isn't about two human beings that used to be two halves of one whole coming back together and reuniting. This is about physical pleasure. So I'll be wearing clothing, you'll be wearing clothing, and we'll each get the physical pleasure that we wish, and then move on with it, because that's what it is. It's all about the material pleasure. No. From a Jewish perspective, and by the way, also codified in Jewish law, and I'm getting too much into this topic because we're really only supposed to do a little bit of time for each topic and move along. And really, the truth is, I'm going to be giving a course on this. I'll link to registration link to this. There's a course that was scheduled for right after the fires this year that we canceled, which was called The Art of Marriage, in which we discuss marriage from a Jewish perspective, and obviously physical intimacy is a big part of that. We discuss emotional intimacy as well, and spiritual intimacy, and all those other things. It's a much lengthier topic, and obviously it's way beyond the 15 minutes we've allotted for it here in this course. So I'm going to be giving a full course just on that topic later on this year. I think in March it's scheduled. I'll take a look on the website. I'll see when it's scheduled. I'll put a link to it in the after lesson email. But here's the point I want to make. The difference between two people engaging in a union, where they're wearing their clothing or where they're not wearing their clothing, is this an intimate moment, or is this just physical pleasure that I need to get out of my system? Right? That's the difference. And from a Jewish perspective, not only is marital intimacy not just a way of having babies or a way of allowing this negative tendency, this negative desire that people have into a certain area where they're allowed to have it and limiting it only to marriage. It's actually considered one of the most holy and powerful things that a human being can engage in, as elaborated upon. Okay, let's move along. Moving on. So these were two topics, specifically where Judaism is different than other religions, and I hope that really makes that point. Now, we just finished discussing that Judaism advocates embracing everything that life has to offer in a dignified and a holy manner. In other words, we do not deny our natural drives. We still have our natural drives, and we embrace them, and we try to harness them towards a more holy pursuit. Right? Okay, beautiful. But are there limits? Are there limits to our embracing life? Are there any values that are perhaps more important than life itself? So for this, let's start off with learning exercise 3A. We're on page 190. Based on your impression and or knowledge of Jewish beliefs, which is the greater value? God's word, the mitzvot, or human life? I'd love to see some raise of hands. If you feel A, God's word is the greater value, raise your hand. Okay. If you feel that human life is the greater value, raise your hand. We have 3 or 4 people, okay? And if you feel the two are of equal standing, raise your hand. We have Mark, Dave, and Ron, okay? And I don't know, raise your hand. There's no excuse for not raising your hand in this one because there's an I don't know option. Okay. So let's start to explore this. We are going to try and introduce text by text by text, and you'll notice that learning exercise 3A repeats itself as learning exercise 3B, 3C, 3D. As we introduce different texts, central texts in Judaism, I'd like to see if your opinion changes. Let's start with text 4A. We will ask Ron to read for us, please. It's on page 191, and it comes to us from the Rambam or Maimonides.
If a Gentile attempts to force a Jew to violate one of the Torah's commandments on pain of death, the Jew should violate the commandment rather than be killed, because it is stated concerning the mitzvot, a person shall perform them and live by them. One should live by them and not die because of them.
Okay, the Rambam makes a very clear statement. A person should perform them and live by them, but not die by them. Okay, so based on what the Rambam just said, right? By the way, this is the origin, which I think most of you are familiar with. Why on Shabbat we violate Shabbat to save someone's life? Why on Yom Kippur we allow somebody to eat in order to save their lives, etc., etc., etc. So let's see if this changed anybody's opinion. All right, let's get some raised hands again. Based on this passage by Maimonides, which is the greater value, the mitzvah, God's word, or human life? Hands for A, God's
Human
word,
life.
greater value. Very good. Nobody. We have nobody for that. B, human life is the greater value?
Yes.
Almost everybody, right? Thank you, Elaine. The two are of equal standing. Anybody for that? Some people are still saying the two are of equal standing. I don't know how you could say that after that Maimonides that we just had. And I still don't know. Anybody for I still don't know? Okay. Let's keep going. The previous text laid down some facts. But the next text that we're going to learn is actually going to be the reason behind why we violate Shabbat, for example, to save someone's life. Where are we here? Shari, you have your book with you?
Yes, I do.
Want
Hi.
to read for us, please? Text 4B on page 192. Why do we desecrate Shabbat in order to save someone's life?
Sure, with pleasure. Text, I'm sorry, 4B?
4B.
Okay. Desecrate one Sabbath for his sake, so that he may live to observe many other Sabbaths, from the Talmud.
The Talmud tells us that the reason why we violate Shabbat is because when we save someone else's life, we're essentially saying, listen, he's going to violate this Shabbat. He's going to eat on this Yom Kippur, but we're going to trade that for 30 more Yom Kippurs, or 50 more Yom Kippurs, or 80 more Yom Kippurs, depending how old he is and how much longer he'll live, right? Until 120, Bezrat Hashem. So based on understanding that that's the reason why we actually violate the Torah to save someone's life, so now what does this tell us about which one is greater? Is it God's word or is it human life? Raise your hand if you think God's word is the greater value. Still nobody? Let me just clarify. What was text 4b, guys? Let's pay attention. Let's apply that. Text 4b is essentially saying the only reason why we save someone's life and violate the Torah is because when we violate the Torah, we'll get more Torah out of it. We're going to violate this Shabbat, we're going to get 30 more Shabbats. Shouldn't that make it that God's word is now the greater value than human life? So it would seem from this text. But let's keep going. Let's throw another text into the mix that's going to explain why human life overrides mitzvah observance. Where are we here? Mark, if you can read for us, please, text 4C on page 193.
The lives of Israel are more precious before God than the mitzvah. God says, let the commandment remain unfulfilled so that this person should live.
Sheesh. At this point, I'm just plain old confused. Why? Because on the one hand, you're telling me the only reason we violate the Torah is in order to have more Torah for a person's life, right? On the other hand, you're telling me that Rashi says this very clearly, that the lives of Israel are more precious to God than the mitzvah. So then why is the only reason we're violating Shabbat in order for him to do more mitzvah? Isn't it in order to just preserve his life? Right? It seems to be very confusing. Let's do one more text, which will hopefully resolve the issue and reconcile all of these seemingly contradictory texts. Ron, if you can read for us again, please, text 4D.
All the laws of the Torah are suspended in an instant of mortal danger. It would seem that the intention in this case is not to override the laws of the Torah, but to preserve them. This reflects the exaltedness of the Jewish people, for all of Torah exists for their sake.
This is a fascinating concept. So the Torah's objective is to serve, in other words, to enlighten, uplift, and refine the Jew and reveal his connection with God, as discussed in lesson 1, where we spoke about the Torah as the guidebook for life, if you will. So in essence, what the Rebbe is trying to say in text, 4D at this point? Yeah, 4D. What the Rebbe is trying to say is like this. It is misguided to ask which one is greater. The very question that we've been asking all along, is God's word greater, the mitzvah greater, or is the human being's life greater, is like asking which is more valuable, your foot or your shoe. The whole purpose of the shoe is in order to serve your foot. So it's true that you might do everything in order to make sure that your foot still exists. I'm sorry, that your shoe still exists, but your shoe, it only has a purpose if the foot exists. In other words, in retrospect, we're now gaining a much deeper understanding of the text. Which one was it? 4B, about Shabbat. The text is not saying that we should violate the rules of Shabbat because they're so important that they be kept in the future, that other Shabbats in the future be kept. That's why we're violating this Shabbat. No, it's saying we need to have the Jew exist because if there's no foot, there's no point in having a shoe. If there is no Jew to observe Shabbat, then Shabbat has lost its entire significance. That's the point. It's not we're letting go of one Shabbat so we get 30 more Shabbats that have nothing to do with the Jew. No, the Jew is a crucial component here. I could give you 80 more Shabbats, but if there's no Jew keeping the Shabbat, what's the point of 80 more Shabbats? Right? The Torah tells us, for example, that Shabbat is a special covenant, right, between God and the Jewish people, oti beiniu beinechem. It's a pact between God and the Jewish people to rest on the seventh day, etc. If one of the sides of that pact doesn't exist, the whole pact ceases to exist, right? Shabbat itself would proclaim, if the individual who's involved in the Brit, in the Ut, this sign, this pact that there is between God and the Jewish people, that if one of the parties is missing, what's the point of it? Right? Just like we can ask, if God doesn't exist, what's the purpose of Shabbat? We can ask if a Jew doesn't exist, what's the point of Shabbat? And that same logic, that same rationale applies to every single mitzvah. When we abrogate a mitzvah for the sake of saving someone's life, we're not weakening or breaking the Torah. We are, in fact, by breaking the Torah, sustaining the Torah. Because the Torah and the Jew are inextricably linked. You cannot separate the two. You cannot differentiate the two. You can't say, theoretically, let's talk about a world in which the Torah exists, but Jews don't exist. That's not a theory that makes sense, because the Torah only exists with a Jew. And this is why, by the way, that when it comes to doing it, when it comes to violating the Torah in order to save someone's life, have you ever thought about that? Thought about that? Like, for example, I think about it all the time in terms of sick people, right? In a hospital, or a pregnant woman, or whatever it is, right? And their lives are in danger. With a pregnant woman, it's a potential danger, but with someone who's sick, it might be an actual prevalent danger. And we're told that we can violate Shabbat for them, right? So you have a lot of these uber religious Jews that are like, so we have to violate Shabbat, but isn't it better if we get it done by somebody who, I don't know, maybe by somebody who's not Jewish, let's say. I was thinking of an example. A child is another example. Somebody who's not Jewish, so they can violate Shabbat for us. Yeah, we need to violate it for someone that's sick. So we get somebody who's not Jewish to do it. They don't have to keep Shabbat. Anyways, at least that. We're not saying that if there's only a Jew available, so then he does it. But if there's a non-Jew available, let them do it. Or if there's a child available, let them do it. Why? Because they're not obligated yet in keeping Shabbat, right? Wouldn't you think that would be the case? The truth is, the exact opposite is true. Dave, if you can read for us, please, text 5.
When life-saving treatment is administered, it should be administered by the leaders and sages of Israel.
When it comes to saving a person's life, because of the perspective that we just introduced, we're not saving the person's life despite the Torah. We're saving the person's life because of the Torah. So if so, let's look at the question on while the Torah concedes the one can violate the priest to save a life, it is preferable to give the task to a child if possible? Not at all. That's completely false. Why? Because we would never give up this this holy endeavor, which is to sustain the Torah itself by sustaining life, to someone else. It should be done by the greatest of all Jewish people. There's a story, I'm sure some of you have heard this story, of the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe. There was once Yom Kippur, and there was a woman on the outskirts of town that the Alter Rebbe happened to be aware of, that had just given birth to a baby, and I guess it had been a little bit more complicated. There was nobody there to care for her, and it was a very cold day, and she didn't have what to eat, etc. And they say the Alter Rebbe was standing in shul. He took off his talit. He went to the edge of the city, chopped down wood from the woods. This is back in the 60s. The Alter Rebbe would be the 1700s. He lit a fire, cooked food for a woman, right, who had just given birth, and then fed her the food. All of which are actions that are prohibited on Yom Kippur. Now, the brilliance of this story is not that somebody took care of her, right? That's obvious. If the woman was going to die, there was nobody else to take care of her. Of course, somebody should take care of her. The brilliance of the story is the Alter Rebbe was standing in a shul with hundreds of other people, presumably, right? Why did it have to be the rabbi of the shul? Till today, we know the story. Why do we know the story? Because everybody in the shul waited for the rabbi to come back, right? Why did it have to be the Alter Rebbe himself who went? That's the answer. Understanding the perspective here explains to you why it has to be him. Of course, it should be done by the greatest person possible. We're not talking about violating the Torah and keeping someone's life while violating the Torah. When you're not violating the Torah, you're actually sustaining the Torah. And that should be done by the greatest Jew. And that's what text 5 is implying. Okay. Now, in the previous, what we just finished discussing, we've established that human life supersedes all religious considerations. My question now, are there any exceptions to the rule? In other words, are there any areas in life that are inviolable? Are there any ideas that were worth dying for? Martin Luther King famously said text 6. We'll ask Jonathan to read it for us because it's on the screen also. Jonathan, if you can read for us, please. Text 6, it's on the screen in front of you.
If a man hasn't discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live.
Do you agree or disagree with what Martin Luther King says? Raise your hand if you agree. Almost everyone. Okay. Yeah, nobody wants to disagree with Dr. King, right? That's first of all, you get canceled if you disagree with him. Anyways. All right. Learning activity 4 is from Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry famously proclaimed, "Give me liberty or give me death," right? To him, he undoubtedly felt that that life devoid of basic liberties was not worth living. My question for you is, are there any ideals about which you feel just as strongly? Are there any lines in the sand that if crossed would render your life meaningless? And we're asking you to write down 3 things. Write down 3 things that you feel that you would give up your life for. It could be your family. It could be your, I don't know, whatever it is, something. But it should be something very specific, not for morality. That's a very broad term. Write down 3 things. I'm not going to ask you to share them. 3 things that you would give up your life for. 3 things like Martin Luther King said. You should have something to die for, right? What are these things? And nobody's going to pull a gun out at you. Don't worry. We're just asking you to list them like that you have that perspective. And now let's examine what Jewish thought has to say about this matter. Elise, if we can ask you to read for us, please, text 7 from Maimonides.
Okay. The above rule applies to all mitzvot with the exceptions of idolatry, forbidden sexual relations, and murder. With regard to these 3 sins, if one is ordered transgress one of them or be killed, one should allow one's life to be taken rather than transgress.
Okay. So, and for generations, people have known this rule. These are the 3 that are called in Hebrew Yehareg Val Yavor. You should rather give up your life than transgress these. They are idolatry, murder, and sexual immorality. Now, having said that, the big question is why? So, Levi, if you can read for us text 8 from Rabbi Samson.
I don't have my book.
Oh, you don't have
I don't have my book.
No worries, all good. Simcha Bracha. If you can read for us, please, text 8 on page 196, where Rabbi Shamshon Rafal Hirsch basically tries to understand why is it these 3 things more than anything else. Simcha Bracha, you with us? Why is it these 3 things more than anything else that we would give up our life for? Helene, if you can read for us, please. You have your book?
I can't.
Okay.
I can't. I'm by phone.
That's okay. All good. Shari, you're up next. Text 8. I'm sorry, I just follow the screens as they are on my thing here. Go ahead. Text 8.
I can't
Text
see the thing.
from Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. The only exceptions to the rule that preserving life trumps mitzvah observance are the prohibitions against idolatry, murder, and forbidden sexual relations. These are never preempted, even at the risk of death, for they represent the epitome of mitzvot between man and God, mitzvot between man and his fellow man, and personal sanctity. And I'm having a reaction to one of these. May I make a brief comment?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, because there's a part of me that's like, what about all of my gay beloved friends? So I had a little reactivity to the supposed forbidden sexual relations.
Okay, we're going to get to that in a minute.
Thank you.
So, but first of all, I just want to explain what he's trying to do. Okay, he's essentially making a statement that Judaism has three pillars in which Judaism is trying to affect our lives. There are three areas that Judaism wants to affect our lives. Let's elaborate a little bit. The first one, I think most people are familiar with. In Hebrew, it's called Ben Adam Lamakom, between man and man, right? Idolatry. All right. So, when a person serves idols, is that the only way to destroy the relationship between him and man, between him and God? No, of course not. There's many things that a person can do that are against the will of God. But it's representative. It's the worst. It's the catch-all that all of the Bein Adam Lamakom mitzvot, all of the mitzvot that Judaism attempts to encourage us to have a relationship with the Almighty, right? Idolatry represents violating all of that. Let's go to number two. The second thing that Judaism wants us to do is to have a relationship with our fellow human beings, right? Be kind to other people. And we all know tons of mitzvot like this. Host guests and visit the sick and give tzedakah and all these wonderful things that we're supposed to do. And negative ones, by the way. Don't talk negatively about other people in Lashon Hara and all sorts of other things, right? But all of them come to a crux. The real way you violate all of them, the cardinal sin, if you will, that violates all of them is murder, by which we are essentially violating the relationship between one human being and another human being. So that's the second one. And the third one is the third thing that Judaism is out to do for us. The first thing was you should have a relationship with God. The second thing is you should have a proper moral relationship with all those around you. And the third one actually has nothing to do with anyone. It's true that forbidden sexual relations is going to be the mitzvah that we choose, and that technically needs another human being to be engaged in it, but it has nothing to do with anyone. It's not God, and it's not another human being. It's your own personal sanctity. The third thing that Judaism wants to empower people to do is you should not just not talk Lashon Hara because that's going to harm someone else. You shouldn't talk Lashon Hara because that makes you a more negative person, right? You shouldn't do things that make you a negative person. You shouldn't harm yourself, right? You should treat yourself as sacred. The next section, which we're going to talk all about, is about the sanctity of the body. Judaism wants us to appreciate the sanctity of the body, the sanctity of the soul, and the sanctity of all the actions we do with those bodies. And when we engage in forbidden sexual relations, and Shari, I want to point out, it really doesn't make a difference which sexual relations here. Sleeping with someone else's wife, sleeping with one's sister, all of them. Gilui Arayot is the general category here. What you're doing is, it's true, you might be abusing someone else, you might be violating someone else, because rape is one of them. Rape is a forbidden sexual relationship. But that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about what you do to yourself when you do that. What you do to yourself is you violate your own personal sanctity, which is another pillar of Judaism. So the way that Shamshon Raphael Hirsch is looking at these three mitzvot, he's not looking, these three are the most extreme, but they represent categories that what Judaism is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about maintaining a relationship with the Almighty, B, a relationship with society and the other human beings around us, and C, a personal sanctity within our own lives. Okay, and now we are going to move on to the next section where we will talk about bodily affairs. Why? Because as we have just seen, the Torah teaches us that most mitzvot are suspended for the sake of preserving a life, right? The intention is the preservation of physical life, the life of the body, which itself is considered sacred, right? Because obviously we all know that even if a person does die, or I should say even when a person does die, when a person does pass on from physical life in this world, we know the life is eternal for the soul. So what we're talking about is ending the physical life. What's so special about the body? Why is the body such an important thing? It turns out that Judaism's stance vis-a-vis the body is very remarkable. When we realize that by no stretch of the imagination do we consider the physical end of life to be the end of life. Your soul is going to continue on, and yet we still place emphasis on the body, right? Now, let's use the language that we used in lesson 2, for those of you that remember. In lesson 2, we discussed that the body is like the parchment. You remember the parallels between a human being and a Sefer Torah? That a body is like the parchment, and the soul is like the divine names or the holy letters of the Torah, right? Which is immortal after leaving the body and continues to live a wonderful life afterwards. So this will really help us segue into the next topic. The importance of treating a person's body, the parchment itself, properly and respectfully. Before we start, I just want to say that this is an area in which Judaism clearly diverges from contemporary Western wisdom. Western wisdom, for the most part, has adopted this notion of personal autonomy. Every human being is in charge of their own body. As long as what you're doing to your body doesn't harm my body or anyone else's body, you're okay, do whatever you want, and that's it. We're told that the consequences of our actions are on our own person, on our own business, and nobody can tell me what to do with my body, my choice is the line, right? I know that that's used sometimes in political conversation, but it reflects a general attitude that if it's my body, I get to decide what I'm going to do about it, as long as we're not harming anyone else in the process. Let's examine the Jewish perspective. According to Jewish law, okay, this is where we're going to start. We're going to start with a very surprising statement. According to Jewish law, it turns out self-incrimination is not allowed in criminal cases. If a human being comes to court and says, I did X, Y, and Z, we do not believe him. If he is self-incriminating, if he's incriminating himself, we do not take his word at it. Okay? Now, what is the reason behind this? So there are those, like Maimonides, that says it's just what the Torah says, and it is as is, and there's actually no reason behind it. But the Radvaz, who was also, and you can read a little bit more about him on the side of the page, on page 197, by David ben Shlomo ibn Zimra, lived in the late 1400s, early 1500s. He says that actually there's a reason for this law, and that's text 9. Ron, can you read it for us, please? Page 197, text 9.
A person's life is not his own possession, but God's possession, for it is stated, the souls are mine. Just as a person has no right to give up someone else's property, a person's testimony about his own guilt in a capital crime is not accepted, or his life is not his own.
This is a fascinating perspective. This is gonna tie into tattoos. This is gonna tie into cremation. This is gonna tie into burial. This is gonna tie into self-harm. This is gonna tie into suicide. Why? Because all of it, this is the foundation. This principle that a person's body doesn't belong to themselves. We do not have personal autonomy over our bodies. We cannot just do whatever we want to our own bodies as long as we're not harming anyone else, is the basis for many, many halachot. It's forbidden to hit or otherwise harm oneself. Here's another one. You're not allowed to harm someone else even if they ask you to do so. Dave comes over to me and says to me, Rabbi Zushi, sock me in the face. I'm not allowed to do it. So what if Dave allows it? He signs a document. He signs away his not an NDA. What am I looking for? A liability, right? A denial of liability, whatever. A waiver. That's what I'm looking for. The word I'm looking for. A waiver of liability. He says, "Don't worry, you're not going to be responsible for anything. Just sock me in the face." According to Torah, it doesn't make a difference. Who does Dave think he is to say to waive the right for his body to be harmed? It's not his body. He doesn't get to choose. He's forbidden to harm himself, and I'm forbidden to harm him, even if he asks me to do that. A person's body is essentially on loan from God, and this leads us to one of the more famous Jewish topics, which is the topic of tattoos. Mark, if you can read for us, please, text 10a from the Torah, and then text 10b from the Chinuch.
You shall not place a tattoo on yourself.
So that's the verse in Leviticus. The Torah tells us very clearly that you're not allowed to put a tattoo on yourself. But it turns out there's another layer of understanding behind this prohibition. Go ahead, Mark, text 10b.
It was the custom of the heathens to brand themselves for their deity, thereby demonstrating that they are servants branded for its service.
Okay, so the Chinuch is giving us one perspective on why you're not allowed to have a tattoo on your body. You know why? Because in ancient times, a tattoo was used as a way of expressing loyalty. Loyalty to whom? To an idol, to a deity of some sort. Now, here's the interesting thing. Till today, that attitude still prevails with tattoos. Because tattoos are so permanent, or to some degree or another permanent, till today, people use it. What's that famous Norman Rockwell painting? Anybody ever seen it? Where there's a guy in a tattoo parlor. Can anybody help me? I think it's a guy, and it's called The Tattooist, I think. And basically, the tattoo is actually inscribing a tattoo of a girl's name onto the guy's forearm, like right here. But it's like further down the arm, and you see like 8 names on top, each one crossed out. Anybody familiar with what I'm talking about? In other words, it's a beautiful, beautiful painting. I love Norman Rockwell's paintings in general. I grew up on them, and I really love his style. But why do people do that? Why do people inscribe the name of a girlfriend or a boyfriend on their bodies? Because they're trying to say this love is going to last forever. And then the irony of the Norman Rockwell painting is that it obviously doesn't. That's the message they're trying to make, but it's actually not always happening. So it's still used as a form of a loyalty, even if it's not for idolatry these days. It's still used as a form of a loyalty to something. Now, ironically, today you have many Jews, and it's very sad and very, very unfortunate, that they think that if I ink a tattoo of something Jewish onto my body, not only is that allowed, but that's something that's beautiful and Judaism would love. I'll put a Star of David on my arm, or I'll put like God's name. I've seen God's name, literally, a Yud and then a Hey and then a Vav and a Hey. I've seen it on somebody's arm, or any other Hebrew term. By the way, it's not just Jews, non-Jews. Kitty and I went to Las Vegas a couple of years back, or a couple months back, I think it was this year, and we took a kayaking trip, and our tour guide had the term Gam Ze Yavor, this too shall pass, written in Hebrew on his arm. I thought he was Jewish. He wasn't Jewish. But the reason this is so sad is because what they're doing is they're trying to express a loyalty to God, and they're forgetting that as especially Jewish men, we already have something on our bodies, a circumcision, that expresses our loyalty to God. So there's a few things that are going on here. Number one, let's remind ourselves, our bodies belong to God. We don't have the ability to go and destroy our body that way. Number two, self-mutilation, to harm ourselves, to put something on, that's forbidden by the Torah. And finally, it's proclaiming a sense of loyalty either to the wrong God, to idolatry, or even if it is for God, you're convinced that this is what God wants. You have one on your body, at least for the males, and even for the females, as discussed in a previous lesson. Women have it in their bodies. It's just not physically visible, but they are born circumcised with this connection to Hashem. So what are we doing here? The whole thing falls very, very hollow. Okay, so while now is a great time to say something, though, that even though a Jew is not allowed to have a tattoo, this does not mean that a Jew is not allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery if he has a tattoo. And this is a very, very big myth. Let's take some time right now to bust it. If a Jew has a tattoo on their body, they are still allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Notwithstanding that maybe some burial societies or some cemeteries can make their own principles and their own clauses, but it is not a Jewish concept. Why would people, where would this myth have come from? Most likely it came from the attitude, which we just discussed. The attitude of somebody who puts a tattoo on their body is saying, I don't feel like I have a loyal relationship with God, and as a result, I'm going to put a tattoo on my body, which is going to exclaim some sort of permanence or some sort of allegiance to something else, be it idolatry, be it a lover, be it whatever it is. And that attitude is definitely antithetical to one of the core precepts of Judaism, which is that we are loyal to God and we serve God. But it does not preclude a Jew from being buried in a Jewish cemetery. And not just that, even once a Jew has a tattoo, there is no law in the Torah. There's no mitzvah in the Torah for a Jew. There's no obligation, that's what I'm looking for. There's no obligation in the Torah for a Jew to have that tattoo removed. Once it's there, it's there. They shouldn't have done it. There was a violation of the Torah to do it. But once they did it, they do not have to have it removed. Okay. Let's move on to a little bit more. So tattoos are pretty straightforward. The Torah itself says a Jew is not supposed to have a tattoo on their body. But let's move on to something a little bit more controversial, but that definitely fits in this category of mutilating the body or causing pain to the body. All right. Elective plastic surgery, right? This is a more difficult question, which also involves wounding or otherwise tampering with a person's body, this time for cosmetic purposes. Does God's ownership over our bodies preclude us from enhancing them, from making them look what we feel is nicer? When the procedure, and I want to make it clear, but we're not talking about when the procedure is meant to take away pain. We're not talking about when the procedure is to heal someone. Then we have very clear instruction in the Torah. Verapa yerape, we are supposed to attempt to heal ourselves as much as possible by the ways of regular medicine. Beautiful. But for the conversation we have in front of us, We're not really going to give you a full answer. At the end, I'm just going to say if anybody does want to engage in some form of elective plastic surgery, they should ideally consult a rabbi and find out about the specific surgery that they're going to do and the specific risks that are involved in that surgery, etc. But what I'd like to do is at least provide some insight, provide some perspective here by talking about two of the fundamental questions that are involved in elective plastic surgery. Number one is the issue of self-mutilation. Do we have the right to tamper with our bodies if it's not medically necessary? Number two, the second issue is the issue of medical risks, because everything that a person does involves some level of medical risk, right? Are we allowed to put ourselves in some form of risk for the sake of vanity, for reasons of vanity? So this question, it turns out, is addressed by almost all of the contemporary halachic poskim or decisors, the Igrot Moshe, the Chelkat Yaakov, the Minchat Yitzchak, the Mishnah Halachot, the Tzitz Eliezer, Nishmat Avraham, a book called Jewish Medical Ethics by Lord Rabbi Emanuel Jacobovitz, the former chief rabbi of, I think of South Africa. No, it could be of England. All of these rabbis that I just mentioned, or sometimes I mentioned the works, lived in the past 50 to 100 years. Some of them are still alive. No, the ones that I just mentioned, none of them are still alive, and they all dealt with this question. We're not going to quote them all. I'm going to try to give you as best as I can of a consensus view, and I'm going to start with Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, dealing with the first question of self-mutilation. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein quotes Maimonides, the Rambam. The question that was posed to him was specifically about rhinoplasty, or what is colloquially known as a nose job. And the woman was writing to Rabbi Feinstein saying that she wants to have a rhinoplasty done in order to increase her chances of finding a husband. Okay? In the response, a lengthy response, Rabbi Feinstein refers to text 11. Now, I'm going to ask Dave Barron to read text 11 for us. But while he reads it, what I want you to think about is the question on page 1. So on page 199, you have the text and then you have the question, right? The question is, how is this passage from Maimonides' code instructive with regard to the issue of plastic surgery? And I'll make it simpler for you. I'll say, do you think it is pro or against? Dave, if you can read for us, please, text 11 from Maimonides. Go for it.
It is forbidden for a person to injure himself or another. Not only a person who causes an injury, but anyone who strikes with malice violates a biblical prohibition.
Dave, I'll start with you. From this, you get pro or against. A woman wants to have a rhinoplasty procedure done, and she feels it'll up her chances of finding a husband. Really, the reason doesn't make a difference. Do you feel, based on this, if you're treating Maimonides like you're treating the U.S. Constitution, lahavdil? In other words, you're really trying to word out of this, is it allowed or not allowed? What do you think?
I would say not allowed, because it's not about preserving life.
Okay. What about the last part of this? Does anybody see the opposite in here?
Yeah, there's no malice.
Go ahead. Oh, yeah. Or Mark, go ahead. Yeah. What did you say?
There's no malice involved in the
Maimonides said you're not allowed to mutilate your own body when there's malice involved. But if it's actually in order to enhance, wouldn't that be allowed? Here's how Rabbi Moshe Feinstein looks at it. He looks at the second half of the statement, right? Not only a person who causes an injury, but anyone who strikes with malice violates a biblical prohibition. So he says two things. First of all, there's no malice here. And secondly, he says, there actually is a benefit. Why? He says, who said, and Dave, this is why I was really hoping you would say this. Who is to say that psychological pain is not considered pain according to the Torah? If a woman is going to look at herself every single day in the mirror and say to herself, I am not getting married because of the way I look, isn't that psychological pain? Now, it's true that psychological pain is in the brain, and we could choose to overcome our psychology. But as you know, Dave, that's a long and arduous process. And perhaps in order to put a person out of that pain and allow the person to move on, and in this case to find a spouse, maybe it would be allowed. That's the way Rabbi Moshe Feinstein looks at it. Yes, Shari, you had a question?
Thank you. Yes, I'm just wondering about the perspective that, of course, some self-improvement with surgery.
I'm sorry, Shari, you're cutting out. You want to start again? You were just wondering about the perspective?
Yes, if someone does some of this surgery and feels better about themselves, then we could say they might be in a better position to then do God's will.
Exactly. And that's the point here. In other words, meaning, Shari, just to clarify what you just did there, I don't know if you were so conscious of it, but you're equating psychological pain with regular pain. Why did we say that we violate Shabbos in order to going back to earlier in the lesson, right? In order to preserve a life, because then there's going to be 30 Shabbats that are kept, not because Shabbat, one Shabbat versus 30 Shabbat, but because Shabbat is nothing without the Jew. So what if? So we went from physical pain now to psychological pain. But as we all know, the psychology of the way maybe the fact that she wasn't getting married was her own fault because she viewed herself a certain way, therefore she wasn't able to get married. And Judaism certainly wants her to get married. It's a mitzvah to get married. Yes, Dave, go ahead.
So I guess I would say, because I've seen the other side, having worked with people who go in to get nose jobs, is sometimes it's a fantasy like I'm going to be better and that'll make me better. And then when you get it and they're not, it can be much worse.
Yes, very good. He deals with this. Another question he asks is, so who decides at what point a person can get a nose job? Like, how big does a nose need to be in order to warrant that they're allowed to get a nose job? Like, who's going to decide that? Right? And like you said, if you're leaving it up to the person themselves, maybe that has nothing to do with the nose. Maybe it all has everything to do with their own self-image and they have to work on that. And he engages in all these things, which is why I'm saying this. What I'm talking about today is not conclusive. But in order to really to give even more nuance to this conversation, we have to address the second fundamental question here, which is, what about the medical risks? So regarding the risks to health that are involved in such procedures, the majority of rabbinic opinions agree that plastic surgery is permitted when the procedure is deemed safe by the general medical community. We're not talking about that there's a percentage of this or a percentage of that, etc. And it becomes a large question in general, till today, in modern halacha. One of the big questions is how we deal with statistics, because back in the day, statistics was between the number 1 and the number 3. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. In halacha, the extent of statistics that we have is when something is used 3 times and it's successful, it's considered okay. That means it works. Today, that's not how data works. We take millions of pieces of data from cases that are being done around the world, and we establish whether something is safe or not safe, right? Okay, but here they're not really getting into statistics or data. They're just saying a general attitude. For example, a nose job, a simple plastic surgery like that, my understanding is that that's one of the more simple ones, is considered generally safe, so therefore it'll be allowed. Let's see how the Chelkas Yaakov, Rabbi Mordechai Yaakov Breish, talks about this. On page 200, text 12. Mark, if I can ask you to read for us, please.
And 12?
Yes, text 12.
Though surgery is fraught with the potential for complications, since many have trodden upon the path of going to doctors, we apply the rule that God protects the simple. Indeed, we see, thank God, that the overwhelming majority of patients who undergo surgery are healed.
So the Chelkas Yaakov is not actually necessarily talking about plastic surgery. He's talking about surgery in general, okay? But obviously the same, with regards to the medical risks, the same question applies to everything. He says basically because we see that when it comes to surgery in general, surgeries for the most part are successful. And as we know, there's all sorts of institutes in the United States and abroad, and the NIH and all these other that they deem certain surgeries. And it takes a long time until a procedure is actually approved for use and for widespread execution in the United States or in the general medical community, etc. So he says, but once it's considered safe, he says, at that point you're allowed to engage in it. So obviously, based on these two things, it would seem that a nose job is allowed. But it's a little more nuanced than that, and there are more details in it. So even till today, it remains a little bit controversial, at least when the plastic surgery is purely for cosmetics. But I do want to end off at least this part of the conversation by saying that this is only when it's purely for cosmetic purposes. If there's anything else, if the person has an issue breathing, which I know sometimes leads to the same rhinoplasty surgery, or if there's some other defect that a person was born with, then the whole attitude to these things will change. The same thing the other way around. The same thing if a person if a person has a deformity that's not just, they think they're not as beautiful as they could be. It's not just vanity. Maybe it's embarrassing. And when they walk around, literally everybody stares at them. That also changes the conversation. I already gave you the detail of like who decides how big and how glaring of a deformity this needs to be in order to allow any sort of surgery. So all of these things are the things that will be taken into account. So like I said, we're not really giving a final answer here, and if this is a personal conversation for you, then I'm happy for you to call me and I'll call the relevant rabbis that are specialists in this field. But I wanted to at least give you a little bit of a taste, which hopefully you found useful, and also to show you how this is built on the fundamental idea that our body does not belong to ourselves, which is usually the fundamental and why in the medical world, in the secular medical world, it's not really a question. It's like, hold on a second, it's called elective. If the person elected to do it, then of course they're allowed to. But from a Torah perspective, there's more to it than that. It's not just about the person electing; it's also, do they have the right to elect to elect to this particular procedure if their body really belongs to God? Okay, we cannot talk about our bodies belonging to God without addressing the main subject which this affects, which is cremation. Before I begin, I want to make a disclaimer. When we talk about cremation today for the next 10 minutes, we are going to be talking about voluntary cremation. The reason I'm saying this is because there are over 400 Jews, or 500, 600 Jews that were just cremated, unfortunately, on October 7th, 2023 in their homes, right? And there are millions of Jews who were cremated, unfortunately, in the crematoriums in Auschwitz. And that story changes everything. The moment that you're talking about what Jewish literature calls an anus, or a martyr, that actually changes everything. Yesterday, when we had our Life to Life seminar, which I know some of you were present at, and again, a big thank you to Ron for helping to sponsor that, there was a little bit of a discussion about the fact that Jewish burial looks the same for almost everyone. And there's a big emphasis on not making a difference between the rich and the poor, and men and women. And you go down the same. Tachrichim, which are the burial shrouds, look the same for men or women. The casket looks the same for men or women. Everything looks exactly the same for men or women, right? And then the one exception to that is martyrs. When a martyr is placed inside the casket, they are placed exactly as they are found. Someone who gives his life for the sake of being Jewish, who was killed for being Jewish, we put them into the casket exactly as they are, without any of all the other details that discussed. And sometimes their bodies look horrible because depending how much torture and how much barbarity or barbarism, I think is the right word, they were exposed to, their bodies may be mutilated in many ways. But the idea behind this is that when they come up to God, they come up to God exactly as they are, so to speak, asking God, why would you have let this happen to this human being? Right? In other words, Judaism always takes the approach that even though we believe tragedy comes from God, we never excuse God for it. We always say that if he needed this to happen, he could have had it happen in a simpler or better way. If this person needed to die, they could have died in a more peaceful way. If this person, whatever it is. And so we are always questioning God when it comes to tragedy. I know we're really we're veering a little bit into the topic of the next course, which I'll pitch at the end of today's lesson, about the Holocaust and things like that. But I still just want to make sure to make that disclaimer at the beginning, that we're not talking here about martyrs. Okay. Having said that, the statistics are a little bit crazy. In 1962, just a short while ago, only 5% of deaths of people dealing with their remains were cremated. By the time 2020 came around, that number had risen to 56%, and the projected number for 2045 is that 81.4, I think it is, percent of funerals will end in cremation. Now, obviously, this doesn't reflect on Jews, and we don't know what the numbers are on Jews. But I can just tell you from anecdotal evidence that unfortunately there are many more Jews that I've encountered, not many, a handful of Jews that I've encountered that have chosen to be cremated. And I want to talk about why that's not allowed from a Jewish perspective. Burial of the body, intact and in the ground, is central to Judaism. And throughout our history, people have given their lives in order to bury their loved ones, to bring their loved ones to Kfuras Yisrael, to a Jewish burial. Where does this come from? Why is burial so important? Let's begin with a text, a quote from Kohelet or Ecclesiastes. Elise, if you can read for us, please, text 13a.
Oh. And the dust returns to the earth.
No, the beginning. Man goes. Page 2.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that. Man goes to his everlasting home, and the mourners go about in the street. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it.
A human being's soul is a gift from above. And when its earthly mission has been accomplished, the soul rises back to God, returning to its source. The body, on the other hand, was taken from the ground. The Torah tells us this very clearly. God formed man of dust from the ground. And therefore, the Torah continues by when God tells Adam, for dust you are, afar ata, ve'el afar tashim, and to dust you shall return. This mitzvah to bury the dead is found in Devarim. Chip, you have your book with you?
Yes.
You want to read it for us, please? Text 13b, page 201.
You shall surely bury him on the same day.
From here, we get the obligation that every Jew has to bury, and you may have heard of this, and for those of you that were here yesterday, for sure you heard about this. And if you weren't here yesterday, again, I just want to say that we sent out an email earlier today with the recordings. It was such an important seminar. And if you didn't get to see them, we sent out the 6 videos of all different presenters that there were yesterday. It was an amazing morning, and there were 40 people there that really enjoyed it. But for those that didn't make it, you should watch those. We described essentially that the Jewish view of burial is that we're supposed to be buried as soon as we can. As soon as we can. So when a loved one passes away, ideally the funeral should be that day. Okay, sometimes it takes a little long to get the body to figure it out. Maybe the only things that we wait for are like if there's an immediate relative that we want to wait for them to come and say Kaddish and be there at the burial. So that would be a reason to wait. But other than that, we don't wait. We don't wait. And that's because of this mitzvah from Deuteronomy, which we just read in text 13b, that we're supposed to bury ideally on the same day. And it turns out this is directly connected to one of the most central tenets, one of the most central beliefs in Judaism. Maimonides, when he boils Judaism down famously to 13 principles of faith, one of them is, Ani Ma'amin, that a Jew believes with complete faith in the coming of Mashiach, and that when Mashiach comes, there is going to be the resurrection of the dead. Ani Ma'amin betchiyat hametim. That when Mashiach comes, all the dead will rise from the dead. Now, this is not to say that someone who was cremated cannot rise from the dead. They still can. In fact, I think the Talmud says that the luz bone, which is a bone, I think, on the back of the nape of the neck, whatever it is, the luz bone actually can never be destroyed. But when a person chooses to cremate, and again, this is why our whole conversation here is about somebody who chooses to cremate, as opposed to the Holocaust or October 7th or anything of that matter, when a person chooses to cremate, the statement that they're making is, I am denying any future for this body. This body is being placed in the ground, and I don't believe that there is a future for this body. There's any, in other words, they're denying one of the central tenets of Judaism, which is believing in the resurrection of the dead. And this is why, if a person does choose to, meaning in their last will and testament, they choose to be cremated, and we are the loved one who is tasked with fulfilling the parents' wishes, this is the one exception that we don't, I don't know if the one, but of the few exceptions that we do not listen to the wishes of the deceased. Let's explore that. Text 14a, Shari, if you please. The Talmud tells us.
Of course.
Page 202.
Here we go. It is a mitzvah to uphold the wishes of the deceased.
So now, Shari, give us an example. Page 202, 14b. What is an example of this?
An example is if the deceased instructed that he should not be eulogized, then he is not to be eulogized.
If a person he's like, I want my funeral to be very modest. I don't want anybody talking about me. Get me in the ground and move on. We listen to him. That's what he wants, right? What is the exception to this rule? Mark, can you read for us? Text 14c.
If, however, he requested not to be buried, we disregard the request.
Why is that? There's clearly a Jewish value to listen to the opinion of the deceased, right? Why would there be one thing that if the person asks to be cremated, if the person asks not to be buried according to Jewish law, that we don't listen to them? Why is that? What are we superseding to God's will and their will? What happened to their freedom of choice? The answer is twofold. First of all, as explained earlier, a person's body doesn't belong to them. So therefore, they don't get to choose what they do with their body. That's number one. And the Torah tells us what to do with the bodies. We have to listen to the Torah, and it's God's body. Beautiful. But here's another point. Throughout a person's life, when a person makes a decision, they might be listening, as we said, to their inner Satan, as discussed all the way at the beginning of today's lesson, right? The fact that every person has a Yetzer Hara. That's fine. I mean, it's not fine. It's unfortunate, but everybody's a human being, and we have times we listen to our godly soul and times we listen to our animal soul. Okay. But what happens in the moments between when the person, let's say it was 10 minutes before they passed, they left instructions that they would like to be cremated. They don't want to have Jewish burial done. Clearly, they were listening to their animal soul, as discussed. Their inner Satan. Okay, beautiful. They not beautiful, but they were. That's what was going on. What happens 15 minutes later? From a Jewish belief, from a Jewish perspective, their soul has detached from their body. Where is their soul now? Their soul now exists in the world of truth. And now the loved one is faced with a decision of, do I listen to my loved one from 15 minutes ago, who was under the influence of their animal soul, who was under the influence of their Yetzer Hara, or do I listen to my loved one now? And now that the soul of my loved one has entered the world of truth, they surely see the importance of a proper burial according to Jewish law. And therefore, that's why we don't listen to their wishes. In other words, another way of saying text 14c is, if however he requested not to be buried, it's not that we disregard the request of him currently. We disregard the request that he made not to be buried before he died, and we listen to his current new request, which we know certainly is coming from his soul in the world of truth, which is to be buried properly according to Jewish law. Okay. With this, we're going to conclude the issue of cremation. And I want to conclude with one more conversation, one more, what are we calling them? Not myths, but like one more fascinating insight. And we're going to call it the soul of the matter. Let's do learning activity 5, all right? Because you guys, your hands look like they've been tired. So everybody raise their hands, please. Which of the following is the most accurate characterization of Judaism? A, an ethnicity. Hands for an ethnicity. Do you believe that Judaism is an ethnicity? Okay. B, a way of life. We got some hands for a way of life. All right. C, a belief system. Is Judaism a belief system? Raise your hands. Okay, we have some hands for belief system. D, a state of being. Raise your hands. Or E, B, and C, which is a way of life and a state of being. Anybody for that one? Ooh, that got the most hands. A way of life and a state of being. Let's arrive to this answer by process of elimination, shall we? Let's start with A, ethnicity, okay? It would be difficult, I think, and I think that's why we had no hands for this one, to argue that the Jews, whose origins are Moroccan, Yemenite, Polish, American, Hungarian, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Eastern European, Western European, all over the world, I think it would be very difficult to argue that it is an ethnicity. Okay? I think also, if Judaism was an ethnicity, conversion to Judaism would be quite oxymoronic. I don't know if there's anybody, are there African Americans that believe that you can convert to being an African American? Can I decide one day that I've never been to Africa in my life? Can I decide that I want to identify as an African American? I don't think that that's really a thing, right? You can't convert to it. So if Judaism is an ethnicity, it would be a very strange statement to say that you're converting to Judaism. Okay, let's try a way of life. If Judaism was a way of life, meaning a lifestyle of allegiance to the Torah's prescribed code of conduct, because that's the way of life that it would be, wouldn't that mean that anybody who disregards that way of life and chooses to lead a different way of life would not be Jewish? That doesn't seem to be true. Ron, if you can read for us, please, text 15.
Israel has sinned. Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda explained, even though he sinned, he is still called Israel.
Isn't that interesting? Rabbi Abba makes observation. There's a story that happened in Tanakh. I'm not getting into it now. And it says, Israel has sinned. It was talking about a particular Jew. And he said, this Jew has sinned. And Rabbi Abba makes an observation. He says, even though he sinned, he's still called a Jew. In other words, sinning, and let's even take it to the max, sinning with every sin in the book. In other words, completely disregarding the Jewish way of life, not following the mitzvot, not following the Torah, does not make somebody not Jewish. By the way, just try it. Try talking to a Jew. I never try it, but you try it. Go walk over to a Jew who's not religious, maybe keeps very little mitzvot or no mitzvot at all, and say to him, you're not Jewish, I'm Jewish because I'm religious and I keep the Torah and the mitzvot. Oh, you'll get a slap across the face. It's worse than any other anti-Semitic thing you can say to him is to tell him he's not Jewish. Like, he prefers to be called a dirty Jew or I don't know what other things the anti-Semites are calling us than to be called not Jewish, right? So clearly, it's not a way of life. In other words, it's not about the actions that you do, and it's not an ethnicity. Okay, let's try a belief system. I'm not following with my slides. Here we go. Let's try a belief system. Now, granted, even if a person does not behave like a Jew, right, it could be that he believes as a Jew. It could be that's why he gets so offended. It could be that's what makes him Jewish, etc., right? But the truth is, the answer is the same. A person who remains Jewish, whether they believe in God or they don't believe in God. Let's analyze this for a second. If a Jew converts to another religion, then wishes to re-embrace his heritage. So he converts to Christianity, let's say, heaven forbid. And then he wants to come back. He realized the error of his ways. He's coming back to Judaism, right? He doesn't have to reconvert to Judaism. Judaism believes he never really converted out. So it's not about a belief system. Even if a person renounces the beliefs of Judaism, it's not that either. So it's not an ethnicity, it's not a belief system. The only one that's left is a state of being. And that, I think, is the correct answer. That Judaism believes that when a Jew actually, that just by a Jew's very being of a Jew, that is his identity. Often this is connected with the soul, right? And the neshama. And the neshama is a state of being. That's what makes him Jewish. Just having a soul makes him a Jew. You're born a Jew, you're a Jew, you're a Jew, you're a Jew. And that identity is probably the most essential definition of the self. Because when you say that I'm a vegetarian, that's a description of who you are. When you say I'm an atheist, that's a description of what you believe. Right? A vegetarian is a description of what you eat. An atheist is a description of what you of what you believe or don't believe in. Right? When you say I'm a woman, that's a definition of a type of human being that you are. When you're saying I'm Jewish, essentially you're describing your core self, who you are at your very essence. I think that's what we're trying to say. And I'll conclude with the following story, which I think really expresses this idea. In the 1940s, when Chabad was brand new and the previous Rebbe had just arrived in America, the previous Rebbe had like a group of people that he would send all over the United States to help people, to bring them closer to Yiddishkeit, etc. And it happened once that Rabbi Shmuel Levitin, who was one of these shluchim, one of these emissaries of the previous Rebbe, before he was leaving on a trip to Chicago, Rabbi Levitin received instructions from the Rebbe to go visit a gentleman by the name of Charles Listner. Okay. He arrives at Charles Listner's office. Turns out Charles Listner is one of these Jews who's Jewish, and heaven forbid you should tell him he's not Jewish, but he did not practice Judaism. He was not practicing Jew. He was not an identifying Jew in any religious way, in any ethnic way, in any cultural way, but he was Jewish. Charles Listner was a big hotshot in the business world, and he had a hotshot secretary, right? That's how it works. So Rabbi Shmuel Levitin comes to the lobby, and the secretary's job was basically to sniff out any religious Jews that are there, and which usually what they wanted was a donation, and to kind of give them the cold shoulder and make sure that they don't get to Mr. Listner, like that he doesn't have to give them a donation. So sure enough, Rabbi Shmuel Levitin asks for Mr. Listner, and she says he's busy. Rabbi Shmuel Levitin had no idea why he was visiting this man. All he knows is that the Rebbe told him to visit him. So he sticks it out. 1 hour, 2 hours. She says he's busy. I don't think he's going to. He's there for 7-8 hours until the end of the workday. And eventually, Mr. Listner comes out. And to see who is this abstinent Jew, like, okay, fine, I'll write him a check for $18 and send him off on his way, and that's it, right? Mr. Listner comes out and he says, "What do you want from me?" He says, and he's pulling out his check to write a check. He says, "No, I don't want a check." He says, "Then what do you want from me?" He says, "To tell you the truth, I'm not sure myself. My Rebbe from Brooklyn told me to come see you." So he says, "You're a rabbi in Brooklyn?" "I'm a secular Jew. I'm not interested in any rabbis. I don't know any rabbi in Brooklyn." Now, at this point, Rabbi Levitin realizes this whole interaction is going to end unless he says something to actually spark a connection here. So he says to Mr. Listner, he says, "Do you know what a Torah scroll is?" So he says, "Sure." Rabbi Levitin says, "A Torah scroll is comprised of hundreds of thousands of letters written on parchment. And in order for a Torah to be kosher, not even one letter or part of one letter can be rubbed out or missing. If there's a damaged letter, the entire scroll cannot be used until it is repaired." Now remember, this is 1940s Chicago. So he turns to me and he says, "My Rebbe in Brooklyn believes that the Torah scroll of the Jewish people is in danger. Letters are getting rubbed out, letters are getting cracks in them, etc." Right? This was early America. By early America, I mean early Jewish America. And many Jews were they threw their yarmulkes off the boats on the way here, and that was the end of that. So he says to him, "My Rebbe wants to help fix the letters in the scroll." And this caught Mr. Lister's attention, and they had he was deeply touched by this metaphor, this powerful metaphor. And anyways, they had a long conversation. Then he was able to get through to him to one degree or another, whatever. That was the end of that. When Rabbi Levitin came back to New York, he told the previous Rebbe about this interaction, and he told him about the metaphor that he shared. The Rebbe said to him, "I love the metaphor, except for one detail." What is that detail? He says the detail is that the letters on a Torah scroll are ink and parchment, and if you want to, you can rub the ink off of the parchment. He says really the connection of a Jew with their Judaism is much more like an engraved letters. When you have a stone and you engrave a letter Aleph through and through the stone, or a slab of marble, whatever, and you engrave it all the way through, that can never be erased. It isn't two separate entities that you can then separate. Similarly, the previous Rebbe shared, The identity of a Jew is ingrained so deeply in their conscious, in their subconscious, in their self-identity, that it can never be taken away. Not if they stop eating gefilte fish, not if they stop putting on tefillin, not if they stop believing in God, and not if they stop supporting the state of Israel. It doesn't make a difference. No matter what, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. And that's the point I want to leave you with at the end of this amazing course. We spent 6 weeks. All sorts of fascinating facts. I hope by the time this is over now, you feel much more aware of your culture, of your heritage, of your Judaism, of your religion, of your identity. Why? Because as we said, it's not just all the above. It's your identity. It's who you really are. What we've attempted to do over these 6 weeks, it's impossible to teach the entire Torah on one foot, but was to give you an overview of a lot of different basic concepts. Judaism's approach to tattoos, Judaism's approach to sexual intercourse, Judaism's approach to eating food, Judaism's approach to angels, to demons, to Satan, to evil eyes, etc. Hopefully, this has given you some form of even if superficial, but overview of Judaism. You've gained a lot of interesting information, and now we can continue on to living life as a Jew, as powerful and proud Jews. Now, I'd like to take just 2 more minutes of your time to pitch, as usual, the upcoming course. This is a course that is beginning on August 18th. And if I can ask you please to turn your attention to the video screens, I'll first play a short 1-minute trailer for it, and then I'll explain what the course is all about, and I'll offer a discount to rollover students, and I hope that you will all join. Oh. In a 6-lesson course, we are going to be examining the Holocaust with the goal of seeing how the Holocaust speaks to us today, especially in light of the recent October 7th tragedy. In the years after the Holocaust, the many, many years since the Holocaust, I think we have been called upon again and again to remember, never to forget, to say to ourselves, never again, etc. And ever since October 7th, which the news doesn't stop to remind us is the worst tragedy that has happened to the Jewish people since the Holocaust, all of these same questions have begun to come to the forefront again, which is why I'm running a course which really is like I think it was offered last 20 years ago from the Jewish Learning Institute. At the time, Simon Wiesenthal was still alive, just for context. And we're going to be asking certain questions. The first question, in lesson 1, we're going to be talking about, obviously, the big one, which is wrestling with God. Why does God permit the suffering of the innocent? We're going to try to deal with that question. We're not going to answer it, because I don't believe that question should be answered, and I'll talk more about that in the lesson. But we're going to be talking about how Moses asked that question, and Job asked that question, and what exactly it means. In lesson 2, we're going to tell some of the stories of some of the people that have very powerful insights into our lives, some of the stories of the survivors and the victims. Every one of the 6 million really has a story that deserves to be told. But we're going to be telling some of those stories and learning lessons from them. In lesson 3, we're going to deal with what we touched upon very briefly in today's lesson. To live as a Jew or die as a Jew. Those are both very, very important Jewish values. How are they reconciled? And what we're going to do is we're going to turn to Jewish history to explore the historical and religious context within which martyrdom takes place. We'll talk about martyrs like the 10 martyrs and Rabbi Akiva and the martyrs of Beitar to understand what martyrdom is from a Jewish perspective and what it's not supposed to be. In lesson 4, out of the depths I call to you, we're going to talk about how we can apply the lessons of faith during the Holocaust to the small little issues, small in comparison, obviously, but the small or large, let's call them, challenges and tribulations that we have in our own life, and how faith can actually guide us through those issues. In lesson 5, we are going to examine the relationship between the Jewish people and Torah that has always existed, no matter how difficult the scenarios. What we're going to do is we're going to turn to some of the rabbis who answered questions in halacha, in Jewish law, two death camp inmates, two victims and survivors of the Holocaust, and how they used the Torah to guide them during those difficult times with actual halachic questions. And finally, in lesson 6, we're going to ask a question that was difficult enough to answer after the Holocaust. It's even more difficult now after October 7th, which is, what can we expect of humanity after these tragedies? How can we retain faith in a brighter tomorrow, in the coming of Mashiach, despite all of these terrible occurrences? We're going to talk about how that belief has sustained Jewish people throughout the millennia. This is, again, a 6-week course. It's going to be 6 Mondays starting August 18th. It's $129 per person, and it's going to be $229 per couple. And we are offering 10% off registration until August 1st, only for attendees of this course. In other words, those that are currently in this course enrolled, if you enroll by the end of this week, August 1st is Friday, so as long as you do it before Shabbos, you put in the code returning, and I'll put a link and the code in the after lesson email. And you will receive 10% off your registration. And I hope that you will all consider joining us. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity to teach you over 6 weeks, 90 minutes each week. I don't take that lightly, and I hope that you have felt that I have actually delivered on that promise to actually impart some knowledge from the Torah to you over these 6 weeks. I hope that you will join us for the next one as well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Zifi?